Yes, thoroughly. Thank you so very much. Again, thank you to Ulrike, Ian, Alfred, and Jonathan now joining us. And again, I'm also sorry that your lady couldn't be here to participate. There are a few things that struck me listening to all the presentations and also following up from Jonathan's presentation earlier. And it's really that need for collaboration. At a local level, but also at a regional level, internationally, etc. And of course, when we talk about public-private partnership. And then, of course, we talk about finding the solutions and eco-based solutions, which is why we're here. And I'm wondering if Ian and Jonathan in particular, everyone is free to answer the question, I should say. But I am wondering, to what extent do we need to look inward to find some of those solutions? So perhaps, listening to Yorlene's presentation, talking about inheriting some of that knowledge from her father. And I'm wondering to what extent that kind of knowledge sharing and technology sharing exists here intergenerationally, and to what extent do we turn internally, inwardly, to find some of those solutions? So because Ian and Jonathan, you're the two working on the ground in the Caribbean, I would invite you to respond to that first.
Yeah, thanks very much for that question, Ardene. Yeah, I guess I'll just start by saying actually that chatting with Ian yesterday before the conference today, it was really cool to get to know each other a bit more. I mean, we've known each other for a while, but to really have some time in person to finally connect a bit more and to really see that we shared similar journeys in some regards. And importantly, that would partly be the decision to get into the fields we got into and to get into environment and conservation and that sort of thing. And I guess the common theme there really was on that aspect of feeling. It came down at the end of the day to certain life experiences that we had in our careers. Ian working in the private sector, but with some very significant large companies. I myself was in the mining industry after graduating from school in Canada. And sometimes it takes, I think a lot of what we're speaking about today, it's really important to be able to bring it into these very important terms for us to be able to understand and plan accordingly, i.e. Ecosystem value, investment, things like green bonds, that's critical. But I think it's also important to us to recognize, I would say, what is taking us there. And I think it is that recognition that we have no choice, that we have to take care of the world. I think we all know we enjoy it as much as we can, in all its beautiful places, whether it's Chaguaramas or the beach, etc. But it's just to say that I think that is an important driving factor. So I'll close there, but I will just mention that we do specifically on that, Ardene, we made a little bit of an effort to bring it into this event a little bit. And at the end of the day, well, actually just after lunch, you'll see a short little 5-minute presentation, which will touch hopefully a little bit on that and relate to all the beautiful arrangements you see on your tables. But there will also be a really nice session at the end of the day in the afternoon that connects us a bit more internally. So thanks a lot, Ardene.
Thanks, Jonathan. Ian?
I think that right now what's missing in the world, but I'll bring it down to the region, is, it's in Barbados, it's called crabs in a bucket, right? Everyone's just trying to do their thing. And we need to develop systems, and who can help develop those systems, private sector, international agencies can really assist with the collaboration aspect of this, so that there's not such a competition to be getting these funds of money. I think that there needs to be, don't get me wrong, you need to be good stewards of the money. But if you have private sector and businesses that really know how to run companies and know how to be good stewards of money, and there needs, in my opinion, needs to be an acknowledgement towards those corporations and maybe individuals that have a track record of being good stewards of funding. It's too difficult to get funding even when you've run multi-million-dollar companies, and it shouldn't be that. So I think that the collaboration, and especially if those companies are collaborating with the right individuals on the ground, and it's all about bootstraps on the ground. So for me, it's, and through my 15-year journey with Wired and Walkers, and hanging out with people like Jonathan and hearing stories, the other region. It's just more important than ever that we start, and I say we because Jonathan and I have been talking about Barbados, Trinidad, and how do we start being able to access funding and use funding on more of a regional level, potentially together. And hopefully when you see two individuals like us that are trying to come together, you're seeing that we're moving the needle somewhere. So collaboration is what it's all about. We're an ecosystem.
Indeed. Ulrike, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that you'd like to share.
Not so much on the looking inwardly. I'm not sure if the networking between the islands would fall into that field. I think that is really, really important because we see a lot of efforts being duplicated, and even on the same island, one agency not knowing that another agency half an hour drive away is working on the same thing, which sometimes surprises us that I have to fly to an island and then connect two NGOs that I assumed one was the cousin of the other and they would be talking anyway. So I think that is very important. And yes, I think especially from the NGO sector and the donors, as a donor representative, we should definitely look at the private sector. And we are lucky in the CBF, we have a lot of flexibility. We are even allowed to finance projects for the private sector. Of course, we expect serious co-finance in that case. But yeah, a lot of innovation is driven by the private sector, and it is important to have them on board.
And from where you sit, maybe it's a good opportunity now to ask you about, from your observations of ecosystem-based approaches in the region, what have you observed to have worked well, and what would account for that, you think, in the region?
Okay, I would say there are three pieces of advice really I want to give what works well. One is on management, one is technical, and the other one on communication I already sort of touched on. On management, what is absolutely crucial where we see projects fail or be successful is whether they take into consideration how much human and financial resources it takes to plan proper interventions, to get all your stakeholders on board, network, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So whatever comes out from monitoring and evaluation has to feed back into adaptive management and influence the next planning. So where that is not happening, the projects are very much delayed and not progressing well. Where this is happening, they tend to go well. And I must say many of our grantees underestimated that, and we as a donor were surprised that organizations that have managed $1 million projects upwards for donkey years did not have that level of judgment to the point. So that is on management. On the technical aspects, I would say there is a region-wide, probably global obsession with planting, whether it's mangrove planting, coral restoration, and coral farming, at the expense of addressing the root causes. Mangroves regenerate very well if the hydrology is right, if the conditions are right. Usually planting is not even needed. Corals might need a little bit of help, but it is burning money if you explant corals from your on-land coral farm, if the water is too hot, too acidic, or if something else isn't right. So that is something, if a project does not look at the root causes and get them first organized, then the project will not be successful. And I've already commented on the third one on communication, the importance of networking. So an event like this is fantastic, but also South-South. One island might already be doing something. So we are hoping now to get, especially coral and mangrove restoration stakeholders together in a restoration workshop early next year. And I just made contacts to some of the Dutch Caribbean. They want to do the same for mangrove and seagrasses. So we're talking about synergies in mangrove, and seagrass is a gap we have, so we're happy for them to fill it, and hopefully we can fill the coral for them. So networking, communication is the third point.
Thank you, Ulrike. And Alfred, we haven't forgotten you. Are you there?
Yes, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, great. We're seeing and hearing you very clearly. All right, so maybe you can tell us from your international experience what you would recommend as some green infrastructure, green solutions for the Caribbean. Of course, apart from what we've already seen to work well through the presentations here today and what we in this room may know of already. Is there anything else, anything you have to add to that?
Thank you for the question. I think there are already many interesting opportunities and many interesting projects that are sustainable and are not presenting as well very good results so far. Perhaps if I look into some of the examples in the Caribbean, there is one in particular that is being implemented by the bank in the Bahamas that is about climate resilient coastal management and infrastructure program. What I like from this particular program is that it has a systemic view in which we integrate not only great infrastructure, but also green infrastructure. And actually, when you combine both ways to look at infrastructure, you get most benefits out of it. So the main objective of this project is basically to build resilience to coastal risks through sustainable coastal protection. And as I said before, infrastructure, including NBS and integrated management of the coast. Mangroves, as it was mentioned before, reduce erosion through trapping sediments in the roots and can dissipate around 66% of the energy. So they are really, really effective. But it's important that we take into consideration that they need to be sustainable. We need to involve communities as well in the project so that they participate in the co-management of this nature infrastructure. And of course, that's not very easy, but I think that through socialization, through participation of communities in the design of the projects, this could be done. So I will stop there for any other question that you might have or any other question from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. And I like that point of community engagement, and it comes up so often when we talk about these kinds of initiatives. And Ian, I'd be really interested, and I'm sure our audience would be as well, to hear about how that factored into WOCA's and what you all have embarked on.
Community engagement is without a community engagement, you don't have a project. You don't have, I should say, you don't have a sustainable nor a regenerative project. You're working from an old paradigm. You don't go into a community and start telling what they need. It's the last thing you do. You work deeply with the community. In our case.
Is there anything in particular that struck you in the course of engaging the communities around WOCA's?
The elder knowledge.
Sorry?
Elder knowledge. What's already there, what our grandparents already knew. That's some of the deepest wisdom that money can't buy. And actually, I'll tell you that you'll spend an extra $1 million trying to get that wisdom, I promise you. And you'll come back and all you need to ask is the grandfather on the side of the street could have saved yourself $1 million. So I think that deeply listening and taking that in. Now there's a time you take that wisdom, you take that knowledge, and then you also go find the brightest minds. You also look for technical, you add that, right? It's not an either or, right? Because technology plays a part in all of this. But you don't discount it. You don't put it away. You're putting old people away in a home. Don't put that knowledge away in a home. It's so valuable.
Jonathan, I'm sure you can relate with the Vetiver Systems project as well, particularly going up the islands. Is there anything that you took away from your experience?
Yeah, speaking to the community-related aspect, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just very interesting. For example, in Dominica, a lot of these islands, you did see Vetiver used to be there. But it was very interesting to see how that knowledge has been lost, but it's still there. So using Dominica as an example, because that's probably the island where we saw it the most, it used to be used in a large way on the roadsides to protect the roads. Again, you all have all seen that root system before, and if you just have that as a simple tool on the edge of roads, it can significantly protect that infrastructure from collapsing, resulting in, not as expensive cost down the line for retaining walls and all that type of stuff. And this used to be done. So in Dominica, go back 30 years, they actually had it all over their roadsides. You see it a bit in Trinidad as well, on the north-south highway, it's used in the past. But what was interesting is that knowledge was lost where, the way I kind of see it, and it's okay, I think that we're growing as a species, but I kind of think to some extent we were blinded by the lights a little bit in terms of getting just a little bit yes, development has been very good and has brought a lot of richesse and good things to the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago. But in terms of just recognizing that nature also has solutions that should not be forgotten and should not be left behind. And so using that same example in Dominica, what was interesting is we would see patches of vetiver on the edge of the roads. But when you ask the local persons, very few of them actually knew about it properly. It was more the older generations, like Ian said, elder knowledge. And also if you ask them how deep vetiver roots went, and this is despite the fact that they know it's used to hold the land a bit, they'll all say 1 to 2 feet deep. You know, so that knowledge of the fact that it's 10 feet was lost. So from the time you show that picture, that transforms. And so it's just to say, but when you kind of ask the stories about what happened, you learn, and it's just again through natural development that we've experienced, but that basically when roads were being amplified and constructed and made bigger, that vetiver would have been cut down and removed and lost, and people forgot about it. We see that in Paramin as well, you know. So yeah, it's just to say that that ancient knowledge is there, and by bringing it back to the communities, not only are you strengthening the communities and finding more cost-effective solutions, but you are preparing them for a more resilient future.
Thank you. Ulrike, so a big part of the conversation is also about funding, and we know that further conversations will emphasize that aspect of it. I mean, you're in charge of an important fund, and I'm sure that there are some criteria that folks here would be interested in knowing in terms of your call for proposals for ecosystems-based approaches.
Yes. Our criteria are always published as part of the call for proposal package. So I think the best advice I can give anybody who is interested, we will be launching a call very soon. I can't give you fixed status yet, but I would say next month, most likely. I would say the best advice I can give you, read the instructions carefully. We have a 2-step evaluation system. First, we invite concept notes. They are assessed by a panel, and then a shortlist is invited to present full proposals, and out of those, we select the projects we will fund. And in the first 3 calls for proposal, I must say I was completely shocked that around 40% of applications did not make it through compliance at the concept note stage because some declaration was missing, because they didn't follow the instructions, what they had to do, the package was incomplete. Very often they didn't have 2 years of audited statements. If you don't have audited statements, don't apply because you would not be eligible. Don't send an accountant's report where the accountant certifies that his or her own work was done properly, the accounts are right. That is not an external independent audit. If it's the wrong geography, don't apply. We are limited by our donor to the countries we can fund. So read the instructions, follow them. Prepare the proposal in time. I think a lot of these errors happen because it's a rush job and they're sent off 2 minutes before midnight to make the deadline. If they had had just 1 more day to proofread and to do the cross sums on the budget, they would have gotten a lot more points in the scoring. And I think 1 more day can always be won if you start 2 days earlier. And you have a day to spare. I mentioned there is an evaluation matrix that will be published. It's always been published. Read it carefully. Check where you get your points and make sure you tick all the boxes, because the box where you lose points, somebody else will get the points, and it is a very competitive process. Now, having said that, although it's competitive, talk to others. We already had 3 calls for proposals. We have some areas that are very popular for NGOs. Everybody wants to do mangrove and coral restoration there, so we might have 2 ongoing projects. And the high project density, we don't want duplication of effort. So if you want to work in that same area, if there is a true gap, make sure you fill that gap and you're aware where the gap is by talking to those who are already doing work. So you upscale, you fill gaps, you expand, you mainstream, you don't duplicate efforts, and you're aware of what is going around you. So you add value, you collaborate with others, and that includes the private sector. And most importantly, all 3 axes of the EBA have to be there. Otherwise, you cannot get the funding.
All right, so we are going to pause there just to invite questions from the audience, because we do have to move swiftly along. I know we're a little behind, and maybe some of you are a little hungry already. but we do want to get your questions now. If you have questions for any of our presenters this morning, afternoon? No? Okay, Alfred, I want to come back to you on the question of scalability. You raised it. I think it's come up in a few other presentations. What do you think is most important for making a project successfully scalable in the Caribbean where green infrastructure is concerned?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think in my oral presentation, I briefly mentioned about three, I'll say, main aspects that are important for scalability. One of them, of course, is related to performance metrics, basically to understand how nature and when nature will present or will deliver the results that have been planned for. I think that's one of the more complex issues at this point. And when you look into what the private and the public sector are working right now, is to improving the way that we can deliver and can create these methods to measure really how those tangible benefits can be projected and can be achieved over the long term. At the same time, the way that we structure the finance of a project, how we combine, for example, the investing on green infrastructure, how the sustainability of this green infrastructure is looked at, as I said before, the involvement of communities, how are they participating and how are we learning from them in the implementation of this green infrastructure. Those are also key aspects. I have to say that the Natural Capital Lab that I mentioned as well has been supporting more than 25 initiatives in the region that drive really innovative finance to nature, from capital market solutions to debt nature conversions to risk capital accelerators as well. And we will continue to innovate on this agenda and plan to approve more projects. It is, very, very good to see all these good examples that you have presented in the panel. And we need to continue working. We have to find mechanisms to learn from small scale projects and trying to look into how communities can participate more actively, and also to ways of bringing the private sector capital into these projects so that we can scale up. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Alfred. I'm wondering if we have a question over here. Do we? Yes? Okay, I think we have one question. Alfred, but just to know that I'm going to come back to you to ask about data and to what extent is that a challenge in successfully implementing those projects in the Caribbean from your experience and your knowledge of the region. So I'm going to come back to you with that. Do we have a question?
Ardene, actually, I wanted to ask a question to Alfred, if that's okay. But maybe he could tie it into the same question you're just asking. But I just wanted to ask Alfred, I assume you're hearing me, but I just wanted to ask, with your knowledge of the bank's different projects around Latin America and so on, obviously we know the bank does very significant loans, typically on the order of 20, 50 million US and even larger. And so I was just wondering, typically where you've seen green infrastructure projects within bank loans, would you say that you've seen projects that are singularly green infrastructure, or is it normally that the green infrastructure components are fitted into larger bank projects? And if so, could you just share a little bit on how that works so that we could also envision, as we seek to see larger financing mechanisms in the Caribbean deploying these solutions, just sort of whether we might be envisioning a project that is like singularly green infrastructure or whether it's fitting into something larger? I don't know if you can speak to that at all now or after.
Well, we're giving Alfred a lot of work, apparently, a lot of homework, but we do have a question, yes?
Yeah, thank you, Ardene. I do believe it's related to what you just spoke about, which is data and the absence of data. I'm kind of struck by the preponderance of anecdotal and experiential reporting right now, and to what extent are we lacking in data and performance metrics? I think one of the presenters on screen, he did speak about that need. And so if they can guide us as to where and is there a mechanism or a framework for collecting data right now?
And so that question is being directed to Alfred, yes? Or anybody on the panel, okay? Does anybody want to
I
take
could
that?
try to speak to it very briefly, but I'm trying to recall someone else who I know who's working on something very similar. But within our team, just kind of highlight our monitoring and evaluation specialist, Casey. Just give him a little shout out, who used to work at the Ministry of Planning, actually. But so he's very, very data oriented and has brought a lot of novel thinking into our team. Well, we have captured data in a very significant way, but manually. So through our projects, individual outreach communities, we have all of the big Excel files and that type of thing. But really and truly, in terms of trying to make that scalable, there's certain exploration being done with AI and the use of artificial intelligence to actually capture data from civil society in terms of what's published online, people's social media posts, different ways that projects can be sort of scoured to capture data and put it together. So I just want to highlight some of that type of thinking that's being done now to see how that could be improved. And I guess just to make a little mention also of the same app that I'd mentioned earlier, We Climate, that will be an effort also for citizen data to be captured. And I guess I'm just mentioning this to bring in some of the digital thinking, just because we do have limited capacities to do it manually. We're doing our best. But if we wanted to really scale, you know, some of these mechanisms are going to become necessary. And I'm not sure that we have any that are fully, you know, full-fledged functioning strongly in the Caribbean already. And excellent work has been done by individual projects. Like Ian spoke a lot about their data today, and I think they've done a phenomenal job at capturing their data. But in terms of the, I suppose, mainstreamability of data broadly to be captured, I think we do need some of the development of the digital mechanisms to support that.
I even go further than that for development banks and even additional private sectors, family offices, funding mechanisms, green bonds, whatever, all the equities and securities that you want to throw at this thing. There's so much greenwashing that's going on out there. It's insane. Not every carbon credit is built the same. We need to start looking at the quality of the carbon and the data on where, how, when those carbon credits. You know, cap and trade, I could do a whole presentation on cap and trade and my thoughts on that. But I think what's important is that, you know, technology especially, now let's take cryptocurrency out of the conversation and let's just say blockchain. I think blockchain has a place. I'd like to see it. We're actually experimenting with a couple of things ourselves. And I think that data is paramount to be showing the successes and also the scalability of any project. But I think as importantly, it shows, it really allows there to keep a level playing field. Because a lot of the larger players that are using this, you know, green engineering and this data sets for other purposes, and I think it kind of just keeps everybody in line. So it's a really good question.
Ulrike, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that.
Well, on the financial side, I don't really want to comment because that is not my field, but on the research side, I mean, fortunately, we work with some academic institutions that are inclined to publish, but not everybody is open to share data. So on the whole, I would say a lot of data exists, but are not effectively being shared. I think that makes up 80% of the shortfall, but of course, science always advances and we never know everything, so research has to go on and more data and more information be developed, especially in the marine field. Coral science is so far behind, say, plant science of what we know and how things work. And there are all these new diseases coming out that nobody knows what even causes them. And if we try to address the root causes, we have to know what causes them. So there is still a lot of need for research and for sharing of knowledge across all the sectors, academia, practitioners, everybody.
Alfred, did we give you enough time to do your homework?
Yes, actually, before getting into matter, I just wanted to share with you, there is a recent publication that came out last year that we did with the Nature Award Institute that talks about nature-based solutions in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we go into matter on the private sector and some of the financial tools that might be available. So I wanted to invite you to look into that, where we provide a lot of information that could be of a lot of use for you. Now, regarding the question, well, the bank has, as you mentioned, a private arm and a public arm. And of course, the amount of resources and the type of resources that are available for nature-based solution projects is different. So if we're looking into, for example, innovative approaches, there are, of course, seed resources that you could use to start scaling up to prove a concept, for example, for a particular type of solution. If we're looking about scaling up some of the already proved concepts, of course, the use of loans or investment grants from international resources could be used for that. So to answer specifically, you could, of course, the best way to do it is in the context of a program that is going to be implemented. You could include some nature-based solution components in the context of a bigger project. Perhaps the impact will be higher. As I said before, if we're combining investments on gray infrastructure and green infrastructure together, both looking at a systemic view, you could have a better impact. As I mentioned before, the example of the Bahamas project is one good example for that, in which we are combining investments on a road that goes by the coast, and also we are investing on a coastal and mangroves infrastructure in order to protect the coast against flooding. So that's a very good example, and that's a big loan. Now, I just wanted to make a point regarding performance indicators. I think that one of the key aspects here is that when we're talking about big scale projects, we include within the engineering pre-work some of these simulations and some of these analysis. And I think that's being achieved little by little. I was, for example, participating into the design of a project in Brazil about a year ago, in which we were looking into different designs that looked into, for example, superficial runoff and how we could maximize the infiltration of water in the design of an infrastructure project that looked into flooding. And in the design, in the pre-design process, we were able to include some hydraulic simulations, and then we came up, or the project executor came up with a better way in which nature-based solutions were designed into the whole flooding infrastructure design to maximize the infiltration of water within the soil. So examples like these could also be used more systematically. So including nature-based solutions from the very first design of a specific gray infrastructure projects. And for that, of course, we need data, we need information from the field, so that it's important that we build those mechanisms to interchange data information so that that data is used in the design of projects, in particular, those hybrid projects that combine gray and green infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. And I think we've come to the end of the time we have allotted for this panel. But if there are any other questions, yes? Okay, I'm not sure what that signal means, but maybe we're out of time. And so, Jonathan?
Just one thing, you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, no, just one thing I wanted to add, just on the line of bank projects and green bonds and that type of thing. Just to make a quick mention, because I think, this concept of green infrastructure is something that, again, as I mentioned in my presentation this morning, is somewhat new to us. And I think it's important for us to be able to move forward grappling with how it can fit into the discussion and that type of thing. And so tomorrow morning's presentation, which is online, and I hope that most people can join, will feature a lot of the bigger financing mechanism discussions. But I just wanted to make mention of one, just building off of Alfred's remarks about some of the bank projects that I think could be useful for us to walk away with as an understanding. We did hear a lot about vetiver today. We just use that once again as an example because of that easy comparison to walls and whatnot. But just coming back to forests for a second, and this is green bonds that have been successfully implemented. So this is not theoretical. It's just been done in some of the bigger countries such as Australia and so on. But, we start off in engineering, we can understand steel, concrete, do those calculations and get it perfect now. When I say that's something we've been doing for a long time. But we're smart, we're people, we can start to build our capacities. And we have finally begun to start to put value on ecosystems, in terms of really studying and understanding that value. And by doing that, what that has allowed us to do is that we can actually start with the science and all the brains behind it, because we know it takes a lot to do that, but to look at a watershed and to say that if the rain that fell on this watershed was to feed a municipality, it would have X value. And I'm just going to use one example. Again, this has been done internationally, but they've been able to look at that and recognize that this watershed, if that had a forest on it, that forest could produce about $100 million of water to the municipalities over 30 years. And, therefore it's worth investing in, but it might cost 30 million to invest in. And that's where you can step into those types of mechanisms, such as bank projects, such as green bonds, etc., to say, okay, now a government can make that decision to say that this is going to benefit us over 30 years, and therefore we can actually put $1 million a year via a bond mechanism or something to regenerate and reproduce this forest. The same way we've invested in our roads and anything else, we can invest in green infrastructure as well that way. So I just wanted to kind of use that example because it's one that struck me when I first learned about it, but you will see a bit more of that in the financial presentations tomorrow morning on sort of larger projects.
Yeah, you're talking about natural capital, and Ian touched on some of that in his presentation as well. So again,
and that's not just, it's important. If a whale is worth $1 million dead and nothing alive, and a forest is worth more as lumber than it is as an ecosystem service, what are we telling the next generations? So we need to start putting a value in nature capital. It's the only way to do it.
Thank you. Thank you to Ian, Jonathan, Ulrike, and Alfred joining us online, and of course to Yorlene who couldn't be here. And thank you to our audience for your attention.